Despite being over 40 years old, the NES is still home to some truly great games, and some of those games have truly aged like wine, or Sigourney Weaver. And while there's obvious games to choose on the NES, like Mario and Zelda, they don't really need the plaudits as such, so let's focus on other bits of Nintendo vintage instead with our look at NES games that aged beautifully. But first, if you've been enjoying our videos but aren't yet subscribed, please consider slapping that big old red button of validation. If we hit 50k before the end of the year, we will give away 50 games to celebrate. You might not be too familiar with it, but Vice Project Doom is an NES game that's aged extremely well, which will become obvious across the vibrant levels you'll be driving and fighting in, including locations such as Chinatown and a biotech lab. While many NES games struggled with multiple gameplay formats in a single cartridge, you go to hell, Bayou Billy, Vice Project Doom nailed the mix pretty nicely. An action game in which you play a Vice Squad detective investigating an addictive gel. Vice Project Doom featured the expected side-scrolling platform action, but also included driving and rail shooter stages. All of these levels are fun, control great across each unique setting, and give the whole experience a sense of grandeur and scope you won't always find with other action NES games. And it's not just the gameplay that keeps Vice Project Doom in the range of decades-old NES games that still have a lot to offer. Graphically, the game looked great for its time, and it does today too, with varied and distinctive sprites against lovely backdrops throughout the different types of stages. You'll also find Project Doom to be brutally difficult in that nostalgic NES way that reminds you that yes, you are in great pain, but you are alive, and yet the game rarely feels unfair. Difficult to put down, but kinda difficult to pick up for cheap, Vice Project Doom also has some truly underrated level design from long-forgotten developer Icom. Contra offered a perfect run-and-gun experience in arcades and on the NES in 1988, and the frenetic joy of that experience is alive and well decades later. Contra arms you with a cache of rapid-fire weaponry and a basic plot, slightly changed for Western audiences, involving an alien invasion and Marines who, for legal reasons, technically aren't Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone, in the same way that Solid Snake technically isn't Michael Biehn. Konami and copyright law in the 1980s? No. Even with several superior sequels among its ranks, as well as stuff like some mediocre PS1 efforts and completely forgotten games that released this year, the first Contra still gets a significant amount of affection from old and new players alike. The insanity begins by throwing you into a gunfight that quickly turns into something far more fantastical than a simple combat mission. Juggling different playing perspectives, including a stylized pseudo 3D effect that has you moving and shooting towards the background, Contra never gets boring. It's a tough game even for today, with a reputation for being a little bit bullshit hard that hasn't changed very much today, but it's an immensely satisfying kind of bullshit hard, and hey, you've always got the Konami code to give you a little edge if you need it, as a little treat. Contra remains a classic that should be at the top of your to-play list if you're new to the world of the NES. Longtime fans can pick up the game anytime and have the same blast they did in 1988. Question time. Which Contra game came with 3D glasses? Drop your answer down below and you could win a free Steam key for free. Despite a title that becomes less fun to say as time goes on because it reminds me of some kind of weird bird fax machine Pokemon, Faxanadu is ageless and unfortunately relatively obscure. This RPG slash side-scrolling hybrid doesn't have quite as much marquee value as some of the other games we're covering here, and that's a damn shame. You are the hero who must aid the king and save the elven kingdom of Aeolis from ruin. It's a nice basic story and it's suitably nicely told, but where Faxanadu becomes an enduring must-play in the modern world is in its presentation. with surprisingly sharp, distinctive visuals and backgrounds evoking a highly unusual H.R. Geiger vibe for a fantasy setting. Faxanadu goes deep into building the details of its world through the varied people you meet along the way. Even as the game has very hard limits to its depth, there's an immersive world here that can catch you by surprise, combined with one of the most underrated soundtracks in perhaps the entire NES library. While a bit grindy at times, and first timers the game will want to beware the notoriously annoying password system, Faxanadu demands careful strategy and timing, and never really lets you catch your breath as you bring orders to the kingdom and sell the first copy of your book.
Mr. Vice President, someone finally bought a copy of your book, sir.
Well, this calls for a celebration.
If we have to choose only one Mega Man game across a run of 6 platformers ranging from very good to phenomenal, we're going with one of the best video game sequels of all time. But honestly, feel free to put basically any other NES Mega Man game here instead. Mega Man 2 took the core gameplay of the initial installment and refined it with more interesting robot henchmen, including Heatman, Quickman, and Crashman. These improvements extend to the stage designs, with each boss getting a level built around their details. Airman has you fighting in the clouds. Woodman has you barreling through lush greenery surrounded by various killer robots. The improvements even extend to the very, admittedly, bare-bones plot, which nevertheless creates genuine stakes in Mega Man's battle with the fiendish Dr. Wily. This might shock you to hear, but Mega Man 2 is a tough video game to beat even today, but it's arguably the most measured in difficulty across the first 6 games. The kinda slight slipperiness of the platforming is a bit of a problem, but is considerably better than the first title. Capcom was seriously hitting their stride for creativity, challenge, and proving the NES could play games with kick-ass soundtracks that were also as bright and colourful as they were infuriating in the most difficult spots. Mega Man 2 isn't just a timeless Mega Man adventure, it's a portrait of a developer that was quickly standing out from almost anyone else on the NES. Clean sprites, smooth backgrounds, and excellent top-down RPG mechanics all conspire to make Crystallis one of the best aged NES games we're going to go over today. Set in a world that feels quite vast for Nintendo's first Western console, with a fast-paced approach to combat that will have you consistently developing and reworking your strategies for enemies who will absolutely rock your shit if you come at them underleveled, Crystallis is another underappreciated action RPG on the NES. Crystallis also ages well for an ambitious for its time story. You're a young magician awakening from cryogenic sleep in the years-long aftermath of nuclear war. As you set about solving the mystery of your very identity, you learn that you may also be the one thing that can redeem the world from the ashes of disaster. That's a pretty wild plot for 1990, and Crystallis further sets itself apart from its contemporaries by giving you a varied world to travel and explore, with lots of monsters and some excellent creature designs for the era. It's a perfect choice for those looking for something else along the lines of the original Legend of Zelda without an old man guilting you out of your rupees. Fix the damn door yourself. The Kirby series has evolved, refined, and experimented a lot over the last 3 decades, so it's impressive just how much of the heart and soul of this series can be found in the 1993 late-stage NES release, Kirby's Adventure. The simple platforming mechanics, as well as the standard Kirby suck jobs, are all present and accounted for here. Where Kirby's Adventure arguably changed everything for the little pink guy forever was in the groundbreaking addition from director Masahiro Sakurai, the copy ability. If you know the Kirby series, then you know the copy ability is still a fundamental component to almost every Kirby game. Like Mario has his jumping boots, Kirby has his mouth, and never shall the pair meet. Kirby's ability not only adds a good deal more fun to a game that was pretty entertaining to begin with, but the copy ability also adds depth to how you progress through a bright, charming, and also relatively easy game that does come back with a tougher than you might think third act if you aren't ready for it. Kirby's Adventure, like any of the best Kirby games, can surprise you in all sorts of amazing ways, even in 2024. With a soundtrack that is almost guaranteed to get stuck in your head for the rest of your wretched life without a new F-Zero game, Punch-Out is another NES game that hasn't given up much with time. The graphics were pretty damn good for a 1987 console game, and the character designs for opponents like Glass Joe, Bold Bull, and King Hippo have only gotten more endearing. The controls are extremely simple, with a level of accessibility and cartoon appeal that has made the game one of the most beloved on the NES. Nostalgia aside, Punch-Out remains one of the most addictive and demanding games the console ever produced. Anyone can pick up the controller, get a sense of their surroundings, and find themselves working on the disciplined, deliberate strategy that must be employed in order to defeat a string of massive opponents on your road to the championship. Punch-Out is a game that will have you tearing your heart out until you get it right, but few games in the near 40 years since its release have ever felt as satisfying when you pull it off. With practice and memory, anyone can pull off that seemingly impossible response to the impending fury of Macho Man, Mr. Dream, or maybe some prelim bum named Michael Tyson? Who the hell's that? As we all eventually come to grips with the harrowing reality that Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse is 4 decades old, we can also appreciate what is arguably the best of this franchise on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse went bigger on everything, including story, graphics, and another electrifying vintage Konami soundtrack. Most of the issues people had with Simon's Quest were addressed, creating a considerably less obtuse but no less challenging story that set a full century before the events of the previous two games. Dracula's Curse also retained the basic components of why people loved Castlevania in the first place, namely careful platforming, killing vampires and other monsters with a trusty whip, and maybe kicking up a secret or two. Recruitable companions and paths that could branch off and provide a completely different playing experience added layers to a game that was already pretty good to begin with. Graphically and in terms of another Konami banger soundtrack, we're talking about elements of why this game is still great that can be found in most modern Metroidvania games. Because yeah, they did get their inspiration from somewhere. You could drop this 30-plus-year-old game into the middle of the current video game landscape, and Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse would handle itself just damn well fine. The early Dragon Warrior games are worth a look if you're a fan of old school JRPGs, and Dragon Warrior 4 in particular is the best one of the franchise's NES run. This impressively expansive 8-bit story is spread across 5 distinct chapters that each focus on a different protagonist, with the 5th and final chapter being the lengthy tale of the game's actual hero, who must bring all of the previously introduced plot elements and characters together. That's pretty cool. It's extremely ambitious for a 90s NES RPG, and you have to marvel even now at how much of an improvement this 4th game was on every level. Dragon Warrior 4 also added fun new features like relatively easier options for saving your game, in addition to a tactics system that allowed you to program party members to carry out specific strategies. A feature that might be a bit familiar to Final Fantasy XII fans. All 12 of you.
I'm joking.
These improvements for Dragon Warrior 4 helped to pave the way for a franchise that would become absolute RPG royalty and continue to produce excellent games to this day. For some fans, Dragon Warrior 4 is virtually timeless in its appeal as the first truly good Dragon Quest game. If you're biding your time until Dragon Quest XII, you could do a lot worse. While the first NES TMNT game really isn't as bad as some claim, the sequel, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, went for a far more straightforward and crowd-pleasing approach. Released as a surprisingly robust port of the 1989 arcade hit in 1990, TMNT 2 is a side-scrolling beat-em-up loaded with references and characters from the cartoon. More than the game before it, this was the first Turtles game to really feel as though it came from the world of these characters. Besides atmosphere and source material accuracy, which are pretty pointless if the game itself isn't fun to play, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, is just pure brawling entertainment. You don't need to know a thing about these characters or even how to play video games to pick up the NES controller and start kicking ass in a matter of seconds. The difficulty in Tumut 2 Tag, I'm not saying the whole thing again, is balanced throughout, and the wide variety of enemies and situations gives you the sense of playing through an episode of the classic TV series. This is the approach that most of the future best TMNT games would follow. The recent Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge brought a slew of new ideas to the table, but it also came with a deep respect for the very simple, enduringly addictive side-scrolling brawler formula that began with the arcade TMNT game and this impressive 1990 port that still is a whipper. Bet you didn't think I was going to slide one of those in this video, did you? There's currently an aeroplane doing wheelies outside my window, outro gang, so I don't know if you can hear it, I'll have to keep this one short. To thank you for being one of the awesome few to actually watch this outro, comment "Thanks very much" down in the comments down below, and I will get you across a Steam key. I've been Jimmy for Cultured Vultures, it's been good to have you, and thank you for watching.